Welcome to May's second videos in the series of how to make dumplings. So in this segment, we'll be talking about how to pan sear or pan fry your finished dumplings. So before we get started here, we need a handful of things. In front of me, I have a induction burner. You don't have to have one of these at home. You can use your stove, whether it be gas or electric, works perfectly fine. And then second, you will need a non-stick pan or a cast iron pan, along with a lid that perfectly fits it. I would avoid using stainless steel pans, primarily because they do love to stick. Dough loves to stick to it, so it will make it very, very difficult to sear your dumplings. And for you folks using a cast iron pan, be very wary that they do run hotter than your average non-stick pan, so just be very cautious on your temperature. So it's also very important that we have a lid that fits our pan that's no larger than it. It can be smaller, but as long as it's not larger, we want to prevent any chance of causing a grease fire, because when we are searing these dumplings, the condensation of oil and water will build on the lid, and if your lid is larger than your pan, it can drip into your burner and cause a grease fire. To which I would love to say, please, please, please do not put water or flour onto your grease fire. It'll cause it to flare up and make it worse. The best way to stop it is to snuff out your flame, deprive it of all oxygen. So first thing to do is actually to turn off your heat source. Then grab a sheet tray or any metal object that is flat that can snuff out your fire. If you don't have that on hand and the flame's getting too out of hand, feel free to grab a box of salt or kosher salt or whatever and just throw it on top just to deprive it of all oxygen. Alrighty, so with that out of the way, I can continue to talk about the other things you need. You'll need a container of water. I have a squeezy bottle here with water. You can use a liquid measuring cup or just some standard cup at home. And I have another squeezy bottle here of a neutral oil. So please avoid using any oil that is a low smoke point. So anything that's like sesame oil, butter, or extra virgin olive oil or olive oil in general, just do not use. So stick to canola oil, grapeseed oil, avocado oil, even coconut oil works. You just want to make sure that it does not have a low smoke point so that our dumplings don't get nice and greasy. Alright. So, the next thing we need is a wooden utensil of some sort. I'm using a wooden pair of chopsticks just so I can get two birds with one stone. I can use it as a utensil to pick up the dumplings once they're finished cooking, to flip them, and also to test to see whether or not my oil is nice and hot. So the reasoning behind that is wood is excellent at holding moisture. So even though your chopsticks or your wooden spoon or whatever you're using is nice and dry, it does retain some aspect of moisture inside of it. So once our oil heats up, we're gonna be putting our chopsticks or wooden spoon or whatever into our pan, and you'll start to see that once your oil is hot, it'll start to boil around the contact point of your chopsticks and your pan. So let's get started. Oh, obviously, we also need our dumplings. So let's get started here. I'm gonna turn on my stove. And I'm going to keep it at a low. So this thing gets pretty hot, so for you folks using a gas stove at home or another induction burner that is industrial grade like this one, keep it on a medium to medium low. We only want the pan to get hot enough, and we don't want to have it smoking before we start. So I have a 1 to 10 scale. I have it on a 4 right now. So I can kind of feel the heat starting to rise a little bit. Obviously, don't touch your pan, but you can kind of wave your hand above and hold it there for a second and see and feel if the heat's rising or not. You don't want to see any kind of smoke coming up It just wants to be warm enough that we can start putting our oil in. Okay. So I'm gonna grab my squeezy bottle of oil. My pan's nice and warm and nice and hot already. I'm gonna drizzle about a teaspoon to 2 teaspoons worth of oil in. It depends on whether or not your pan size. So it depends on your pan size. If you have a larger pan, you will need more oil. If you have more dumplings, obviously, you'll use a larger pan. But since I'm only cooking 2 dumplings today, I'm going to only add a little bit of oil, and I'm going to swish it around my pan. And so it's nice and coated throughout. And a little more as well. My pan is pretty big. Okay. So. Right now I'm putting my chopsticks into the oil just to check to see if my oil is nice and hot. So it's not quite bubbling around the contact point just yet, but it is getting there. Okay, it's very difficult for you to see on camera here, but there are tiny little bubbles forming around the contact point of my chopstick. Tiny, yeah, you can kind of see it right here. Tiny little bubbles popping, just like that. So that means my oil is ready and ready to go. So I'm gonna start putting my dumplings in. I only have 2 here, but it's all I need for the demonstration. Pop it in. You can do a quick little wipe if your oil hasn't spread out evenly enough. And immediately after we put our dumplings in, we want to add our oil. So this next step is a little bit tricky. We want to pour the oil in and lid the pan as soon as you can. So right after another, and you only need about a teaspoon of water in. So we're gonna dab our water in, and then we're gonna lid right away. Okay. Try to avoid any large pools of oil, just because it will spatter. So we're gonna hold this in front of us like a shield, and pour our water in, then we're going to lid it right away. So our oil and water will start to mix and create a violent reaction. Obviously oil and water are not friends, but they're excellent at cooking things. So we're doing 2 things at once here. We are pan searing the bottoms of our dumplings to get nice and crispy, while we are trapping the water inside, and it's creating a sort of steam chamber, so that we're cooking the remainder of the wrapper and the inside of our dumplings at the same time. So typically this takes anywhere between, I want to say, 5 to 10 minutes, depending on how many dumplings you have. There's a lot of variables. So how big your pan is, how many dumplings you have, and what kind of heat source you're working with, and what kind of equipment. So it's different for everyone, but these are just some loose guidelines for you folks to follow. So you want to use sound as an indicator. So we're listening for the popping of the water to subside a little bit before we check on our dumplings, for 2 reasons. Just that we don't get assaulted by the spatter, and second is that we want to give it time to cook. Okay, so once the popping is subsided, that means we can either add more water or check to see if it's done. So right now I'm going to lift my pan up, but when I lift my lid up. But when I lift my lid up, I want to be very, very careful not to tip it in any way, because of that condensation of mixed water and oil inside on the lid. Any tipping could result in it dripping off into my burner, possibly causing a grease fire. So I'm going to go up and to the side very smoothly and gently. Okay. And then we'll check my dumplings. Nice. So I'm getting a nice little golden sear here. Perfect. So this is the lightest I would go here, and this is the perfect color that I want. So almost like a hash brown color. Now I'm going to turn my stove down a little bit here. Alrighty. And if you want, you can flip your dumplings over to get more of a sear on the other side, but it's not necessary. I like to just have my dumplings seared on one side. In terms of checking to see whether or not the inside's cooked, you want to grab a meat thermometer, and you want it to read 165 on the inside. And when you're using your meat thermometer, make sure you don't put it straight into your pan. You want to go diagonal through the center of whatever you're temping, just so that you don't accidentally tempt the bottom of the pan. So, with that said, some of you folks might have thicker wrappers if you're using homemade wrappers, in which case the wrapper won't turn as clear as this. This is a store-bought wrapper. So store-bought wrappers will go from a opaque to a almost translucent color, while the homemade wrappers will become less squishy. They'll become harder to touch, and when you poke down on it, it should not sink in. Your fingerprint shouldn't be inside, and when you push down it should spring back like cooked dough. Alrighty, so that goes into a bowl, and you just rinse and repeat that process over and over again. Typically, it takes about 2 to 3 cycles of adding water and lidding. The only reason why mine only took 1 try is because my heat source is very, very hot. So just be very careful, always temping your dumplings. If you don't have a meat thermometer at home, you can just do it old school. Pull your dumpling off and just cut it in half with a knife or chopsticks, or just rip it with your mouth. Just be very careful, they are hot. And if it needs more time, if it's not raw, I mean, obviously it's good to go, but if it is raw, put it back in for 30 seconds to a minute, and just constantly watching your heat not to burn it. Alrighty.